Welcome to IT Trendsetters. Today we are here with Alex from NetBrain Technologies. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I run partners and alliances worldwide for NetBrain. Prior to here, I was at a few other companies, Iron Mountain and Riverbed among them. So I have a lot of experience with the networking space and companies that work with partners. And so I'm very excited at NetBrain to be able to bring something unique to our partners that they can use to differentiate themselves with their customers.
What do you do for fun?
I do boating. So we have a boat. I'm looking forward to taking the boat from New England to Florida next year for the first time.
Wow. Boat or motorboat?
A motorboat, and the networking component of that is I'll be mounting Starlink on it so I can have my satellite internet connection on all the time for work. Yeah, so I would say that, when the conversations that I'm having with customers kind of fall into, when we're talking to people who are in operations, the two areas are one, hey, we need visibility because we can't manage what we can't see. And that visibility for us is, layer 2 through 4 mostly of the network. And we give the visibility, from the edge through the legacy environment and into the cloud, right? And that into the cloud is key because you have a server in the cloud, you have your user somewhere on the other side of your VPN that's sitting in your data center, and you need to know how is that user connecting to that server, or maybe why aren't they connecting well, even though they were yesterday, or maybe they're not connecting today and they were yesterday. So what's different, right? And we can answer that question really easily. And then when we talk to more of the senior people, they want to become proactive, and so we start talking about preventative automation of understanding how the intent of the network design and preventing config drift, so that they can prevent outages and breaches before they happen. So I tend to get a lot of questions about that sounds interesting to them, just like the word automation sounds interesting, but everybody says automation, right? Right. I was just at a partners event, and I don't think there was a single vendor that didn't say the word automation. It's, I felt like I was, I was texting my marketing guy and saying, okay, so it's not a good word anymore, right? Because everybody's using it and it's become meaningless. But the reality is, if that we do a couple of things different. We're focused on the configs and monitoring change, and we're also focused on automating what the work network engineers actually do. And so one of them is very proactive. The other one's a little less proactive because we have to wait till a ticket gets open, but then we can automate the work that a network engineer would do. And that tends to result in a very large reduction in the need for first call people, and a smaller but still significant reduction in the number of escalation engineers. And many times when I talk to executives, their concern is they can't hire enough of those two groups of people. So we're really solving two problems. One is they don't have to budget for as many, but they don't need as many as they budgeted for. So they don't have to go hire the people they can't find. And that's I would have, if you'd asked me 2 years ago if that was going to be the biggest problem, I probably would have said no. But I think today that's, if I talk to an IT executive, you talk to more of them than I do, but that seems to be pretty high on their list of problems.
Sure, finding people and then not losing them once you find them, that's always a challenge. And then losing that knowledge that walks out the door. So no, that all makes sense. And visibility, how do you fix something if you don't even know what you have at the time?
Yeah.
Are there any changes in the challenges of finding people? I mean, it'd be fairly recent. If you're seeing this change, it'd be fairly recent.
Right.
No, I think the what we bring to the table is not having to find those people, because we automate the jobs, and the people who are there working that are experienced become automation engineers. So to the point of not losing them, you go from telling them you're a network engineer and you're overworked and that's just what your life is, to you're an automation engineer, you're more valuable. They might pay them a little bit more, but also the workflow gets improved, right? Because it's not a lot of the same tickets that they can't fix. You're reducing the number of tickets, and you're automating processes to reduce that, the number of tickets, and actually prevent tickets from occurring, right? Because if you mitigate config drift, now a lot of problems that would have occurred, outages or breaches, don't happen, right? And that's exciting in a way, but it's challenging in a way, because after you get a little bit good at that, now the first year when you do it, you have a bunch of tickets in ServiceNow from last year that you can look back and say, look, all these that happened last year didn't happen this year. Now, as you go through the improvement cycle, you're not cutting it by 50%, you're cutting it by 10 or 15%. So you need to kind of have a regular dialogue with senior management so that they kind of understand the value being delivered, and not assume that the smaller improvement over last year is small, right? It's kind of a mode of continuous improvement. And if you stop automating, you're going to go backwards really fast.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, so it's the whole thing of, they're going to find out a ton right off the bat, because they've got a lot of pieces they can look at that
Right.
are repetitive, and they're common. Then you're going to automate those, so you don't have to deal with those anymore. So if you put that on a chart, almost, that you can't forget about that first 50% that you don't have to deal with anymore.
Correct. It's and then the flip side of that is I talk to partners who worry, is my service revenue going to go away, right? And so we have to walk back and say, okay, so let's take a look at this customer over the last 3 years, right? They, what happened when they rolled out ACI? What happened when they moved off of VIA? Right? What happened when they decided that they need to micro-segment the environment for security, right? These things don't stop happening, and every one of them is a whole nother pile of intents that need to be built into the network to drive the preventative automation.
Yeah, do you think that intent-based networking is overused also?
Not as bad as automation, but yes.
Yes.
So far, Tesla's not promoting an intent-based driving car.
I intend to get you there.
They have the autonomous driving car where I tell it where I want to go. They're not quite to the point of like, well, you just get in the car and it knows where you want to go.
Did you see that thing this morning? The guy, I was on the news, but some lady was driving down the highway and she was sleeping in the car, and some guy's trying to wake her up.
No,
I think
they're pulling up next to her and beeping the horn, and she's out like a light in the car driving down the highway.
I don't know if either of you is a Tesla driver, but when I was up in Boston visiting, I went to the Hertz rent-a-car thing, and they told me pick any car in this row, and there was a Tesla, and I said, I think I should try it. My wife's like, you're gonna hate it, and I'm gonna, and I said, no, I got to try it once. So it was a nightmare. I took the car, got home, right? We went out somewhere, and like, the whole time, like the amount of range you have, you're watching it drop. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to charge it. I plugged it in at IKEA, and the car was set to only charge up to 50%. God knows why, but so it didn't charge much. And then I got home, plugged it in at home. And in the morning I'm reading about it, and I'm like, why didn't it charge? Oh, well, it only adds 3 miles for every hour when you plug it in at home. So overnight you get like another 30 miles. I'm like, that's not even enough to like make it to the office. So then I stopped at one supercharger. I look up, I'm going to go to a Tesla supercharger, right? So I look them up on the phone.
The heavy duty power ones on the 220.
Well, I get to the first one, and they've torn down the mall and they're putting in a new one. So like, there's nothing there. I get to the second one, and the charge adapter in the car doesn't fit the station. And I'm like, all right, I give up. I have enough to get back to Hertz. I go to Hertz, and they're like, yeah, half the people half the ones we rent out come back because people can't figure out how to charge them. I'm like, I'm pretty tech savvy, right? If it was possible to charge this thing, I tried 4 different ways. None of them worked.
Talk about someone that has, if you're always one of those guys that's paranoid, like if your gas tank gets too low, you'd have that going on continuously. Be like, oh shit, I gotta get charged. Where can I charge?
Yeah, and it's it has like, it takes like the worst features of the iPhone where you can't find things unless you already know where they are.
Exactly.
And puts it in a car that removes all the fun things of driving.
Right. Yeah.
So
It's like I got some Apple AirTags for when I was at last week in Madrid, and trying to find those in the Apple phone.
Oh yeah, that's impossible.
Yeah, they're buried way in there. You have to know where to look, and you think it would be more intuitive, but it's not.
it looks good.
It looks cool. Yeah, I thought I was being high tech, and I paid $17 for a little tag, just to be cool. Then I couldn't even find it.
Yeah, it's and now they have but anyway, they have an app so you can tell if anybody's tagged you.
Oh, really? Let's see.
Yeah, because people,
okay.
yeah, because like, people were tagging their ex-spouses to track them.
Nice. Yeah. So, I imagine you get a little bit of trouble if you get caught doing that.
Yeah. So yeah, but long way to answer your question. Yeah, I think intent-based is also well, it's not as much that they're overused, right? Which is part of the problem, but they're used to talk about very different things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like when Arista talks about intent-based, they mean something completely different than Cisco and different from us.
Mm-hmm.
And and if your network guy's a little bit smart, they kind of just shake their head and say, like, these 3 things are not the same, right?
Oh, yeah. We're in that category, that broad category with our product of attack surface management. What is that?
Right.
You can define that as a lot of different pieces of the pie, different levels of the model.
It's like my guys, I used to, say we're not security, and if you talk to a security professional, they would tell you that what we are is some kind of a compensating control, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not the primary lock on the door.
Right.
Kind of, it's a little bit like your webcam inside the room.
Right.
That will tell you if someone walks in the room. It's, you don't want to have a room without a lock.
Right.
But
so you put another door in your room, you want to know that, right?
Right. And if someone makes it through the door, it's good to know, right?
Right.
So we're a little bit like that for some of the security stuff, but at a very basic level, they design the network to be safe. Mm-hmm. And if the design stayed the way it was originally implemented, the answer is they would be safe, and the bad actors couldn't travel around it and couldn't do the things that would cause a significant breach. Mm-hmm. But every time something happens, network engineers get on devices to fix things. And it's just very hard for a human to know when they're fixing problem A to keep in mind the 47 other things that should be kept in mind, mm-hmm. When you're fixing that one thing. And a lot of times it's not that they don't know, but it's like they forget, or they, meant to change it back, or, or they didn't know what the last guy did to meet the standards. So you have now, if enough people touch the network in enough ways, and you're not watching it deeply the way we can, you get config drift, and eventually enough config drift ends up, causing outages or breaches, or both.
Sure. Yep. You can put anything in there, like just a temporary access control list or something, or
right.
Nothing so temporary is permanent. Permanent temporary.
Exactly. And a lot of those are very, since they're viewed as temporary for a few minutes, they're very damaging when they get left behind.
Right. Yep.
Right. Because they tend to ignore the whole list.
Right.
And we also find that automating the ticket resolution is something that the execs get, but the network engineers don't always get right away. Because when you talk about config drift and preventative automation, if you're a network architect or a network engineer, you kind of view that as, that's my problem, right?
Right.
I don't know how I'm going to fix it, but
Right.
I know it's in my wheelhouse, and if I could fix it, it would be a good thing to fix. So they latch on to that, and they understand the no code piece when we show it to them, because it's based on understanding CLI and logic, and engineers are logical and they've been doing CLI for a long time. So they kind of grok that right away. When we talk about improving the workflow by automating tickets, well, it's like they need to go talk to another team, which is the ServiceNow team maybe. And so that's like talking to people about in other departments about, doing something together. And that's, that's kind of their boss's job, right?
Right.
So it's lots of times it's better to have that conversation with the person in charge of where those two solutions kind of come together in the hierarchy, because they get it, right? And a lot of times they own both problems, right? They own the problem of solving the tickets better and faster and most efficiently. And they also know the limitations they have in network operations, meaning, their best engineer is not awake at 1 a.m. paying attention to the ticket that just got opened, right? Someone will pay attention at 9 o'clock and they'll try for 20 minutes and they say, I couldn't recreate the problem. And they'll close the ticket, and tomorrow night you'll get the same ticket again, right?
Yep. And then the poor sucker engineer always eventually gets involved with the most subject matter expert, because
right. Or it becomes, some companies just auto close a lot of tickets. If it's not high severity, if the network's not down, just close it, right? Because we'll never get to it, right? Which is, that's suboptimal in a number of ways.
Sure. Yep. I learned that lesson 35 years ago when I worked at Wisconsin Bell, and they would always call a customer at 5 to 5, and if they didn't answer, they'd say, we can postpone it till 8 o'clock tomorrow morning because it's no answer, not available.
Right.
So,
Well, that's the first line, reducing the ticket volume and also automating that results in a reduction in those first call people, because we're taking care of a lot of that troubleshooting. We're doing it in a standard way. So either we find the root cause, or we determine it's not the network, or it's kind of ready for escalation with a lot of work already done to it in a very standard way for the organization. So whoever gets that escalation, they don't feel like the first thing they have to do is do all those steps again, because like they don't know what the guy did, but since it was done by the system, they're like, okay, I get it. That's what happened. And they can start kind of progressing from there. And
how does NetBrain interact with things like Juniper Mist, which will try and fix some Wi-Fi issues, or you get into Wi-Fi issues even, I guess,
so
the monitoring?
So we're adding capability for Juniper Mist, but we're not going to be, we're going to be aware of, the physical transport layer, but more of a, is it on or off?
Sure.
Right.
Yes.
We're not really going to be debugging kind of the which I think would be impossible, right? You need someone, there's a lot of things you could do remotely, but some RF stuff, you just have to be there to do it. But I think, in terms of what we do with layer 2 through 4, we're going to include Juniper Mist in that, just like we do other access points where we can tell who's connected where, how are they, what's their path, how are they transiting the network, and some of the things that Mist does in terms of moving you from one spot to the other because connectivity is better or whatever, we'll be able to track that. And so then you might say, well, we had really good performance yesterday. What changed? Well, one of the access points went down and Mist fixed it, but now you're like not close to an access point. You're on the far edge. The good news is you're connected, but you're running much slower than before, right?
Right. So does your solution get into the Wi-Fi much, or is it mostly the backbone part of wired networks or just?
For us, the access points are really very much on the edge.
Right,
So we get into it mostly from the perspective of it's much better if we're troubleshooting from, if we're building the path from where the laptop's connecting, it's better than if we're building the path from, like, let's say, the router for the campus.
right, okay. So access point basically in.
Right.
Okay.
Or VPN in.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, access point VPN, wherever you kind of hit that landline part of the network.
Right.
But then you own the private part of that.
Yeah, and a lot of times, the customers will have offices that are connected through a service provider.
Mhm.
So then we're really looking at what the customer has in there, right? And it might just be a software-defined switch or something.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a lot of parts to consider, I guess, as far as isolating, but I can see the big advantage of being able to take that, those repetitive problems and get those hit first, get rid of a big part of your problem, then you can get more and more sophisticated over time.
Yeah, well, we tend to focus when we talk to customers about their problems. We usually, if we're kind of digging into it, and we say, okay, let's look at your ServiceNow tickets for the last 3 or 6 months, and we'll be usually looking for, let's look at 4 that are high frequency. Let's also pick 2 that had the highest impact to the business. And maybe they only happened once in 6 months, but
Right.
if your ATMs were down for 30 minutes, that's pretty high impact to the business.
Sure.
And then let's take 2 that had a high impact to the team, which maybe nothing bad really happened, but you had to take 4 of your senior guys and spend a month preparing a report to the board because there was a breach into your trading system. And like, there was a breach, but nothing happened, right? Everything was fine, nothing went down, but you still need to write the report and explain it and come up with a plan of how you're going to keep this from happening again, because it could have been bad, right?
Right.
And so we look for that high impact to the team, high impact to the company, and then high frequency. And we find that mix tends to, and if I was a VAR, I'd be looking at doing that like every 60 days to come up with my list of automation projects for the next 60 days. Right. And, I think that works. Yeah. There's a lot of ways you could slice that. Obviously, the 4, 2, and 2 or 3, 2, and 2 is just how we started. Because high frequency is usually easy, low hanging fruit. The high impact to the business can be or not.
Right.
Right. But it's high impact, so it's worth the time and effort. And the one that uses up your senior guys, is good because it's usually a high visibility thing. But also it's the work your senior guys least enjoy doing. So if we can figure out fewer of those, there's a lot of team satisfaction.
Correct. Is there a recommended
That comes out of that.
different troubles like that? Is there a way a customer can dip their toe in to see if they're going to be a good candidate? Or
Yeah, actually, we do 2 things to do that. One's kind of the traditional. We can do demos. We have a demo environment we can let customers use, and we can also do proof of concepts. We have a cloud proof of concept where they just put a forward server in their production environment to pull data, and we can also install it on-prem if they want for a proof of concept. We'll also, so that's one thing, right? Kind of actually showing the technology and what it does. The other thing we can do is we can take the ticket data, and we have a pretty good methodology for analyzing it, right? So there's a lot of keywords we look for, things we look for in the tickets that we've learned over time. And then so if you kind of draw the Venn diagram of here's the problems you have, and here's the problems we know we can fix efficiently. So then we can go to them and say, this is what you can expect from, and we give them a sample of them. And what we'll do with the sample is we'll say, okay, this particular problem that you have with, make it something simple, a port flapping at the pharmacy application branch for CVS, right? So whatever that problem is, you're going to multiply it by, I don't know how many stores they have now, but probably 10,000, right? So if it's happening in 10% of your stores in a week, there's a lot of port flapping going on, right? So we'll say this is how you troubleshoot it today. This is how successful you are in troubleshooting it today. Only 5% of the tickets were closed. 38 or 50% of the tickets were repetitive, meaning they just it keeps happening, right? And it's annoying people, but no one's fixing it. And so then we do that kind of analysis, and then we say, okay, this is how you would automate it in NetBrain. These are the steps that would happen automatically. These are the possible outcomes, and here's your decision tree based on that. And based on our experience, this is the outcomes you'll see. And usually you're getting something that most customers look at, and if it wasn't that detailed, they wouldn't believe it, because we're hitting like 70-80% reduction in MTTR, which translates pretty directly to freeing up resources on the team, right? And or for a lot of executives, what they like is the CSAT or Net Promoter Score aspect of it, because that's built into their MBOs. And what they're looking at when they look at the data is like, we're not actually fixing any of these problems.
Right.
We're ignoring.
You're living with them. You live with them.
Yeah, they're ignoring 80-90% of those, tickets. So, if they could fix them instead of ignore them, that's going to make people happier, and that's one of their metrics.
Sure. I just was actually involved in a retail organization that's having some challenges with card readers and 802.1x authentication, and I can see where this problem is just going to get bigger and bigger in the future as you have more and more of these devices that don't really want to talk to an 802.1x authentication, but they still must work, and they're mission critical. But their security policy says they got to protect all their ports, and you can get a lot of strange race conditions going on.
And one of the things we find, again, going back to the cloud and the hybrid visibility, is a lot of people have DevOps teams that are moving fast and deploying things quickly. That's kind of their mission.
Right.
And most of the DevOps players on the team don't really understand the network underneath. And so what'll happen is they'll have an application that's working fast, fine. It's working in the lab, fine. They deploy it at the pilot location, fine. Then they start rolling it out, and and they start running into what seem like intermittent or random problems. But you start looking at the network and the paths, right? And looking when you go into AWS, where the simple one is, where are you connecting? It's a little bit trickier of where are you actually running inside AWS, differences in how they instantiate it from a DevOps perspective when they start it up can mean it's like, oh, you forgot to tell it, or you told it to use the same location as the last one you did, except the last one you did was in New York, and now you just did one in California. So you're putting a lot more latency into it, and a lot of applications today are not written to handle latency elegantly. So so stuff times out, and a lot of times it's security stuff that times out, or we've caught things that are just bad programming. Right, I've started as a programmer, right, and you write an application, and it's a really cool application because halfway through you're pulling a map from Google or Yahoo or somewhere, and you're presenting data to the customer with a pretty map. It's awesome, right? Except you're waiting for the map to render before you go to the next step. So if the map is slow rendering, now your whole application is slow, and other stuff times out, and you're trying to troubleshoot that, and you're trying to figure out why is it slow, what changed, and not having context is a big problem. And we, I've seen many times where the solution pops out of people's heads as soon as they see the picture.
Mhm.
Like you show them the picture in one of these meetings where you have like everybody on the call, because like, the CEO is now helping troubleshoot the network.
Right.
And the DBA will say something like, well, why is that database server in Azure? It's not supposed to be in Azure. We're
Right.
not supposed to, like, even if we burst, we're not supposed to move the database server there, right? We're supposed to move like other things, but not that, right? And you find out that, the reason for that is, latency is too high, or or there's not enough capacity to run it, or whatever limitations there are. But no one knew it was running there till they see the path. And some guys like, why is that there, right? Or why are we connected here? SAP is a big customer, and they're moving a lot of their applications to all 4 clouds, right? The 3 that we're aware of, plus Alibaba. And as they do that, they use NetBrain to troubleshoot where they're connecting, how they're connecting.
Well, that's a great visibility point that you wouldn't necessarily understand just by looking at layer 4, 5, and above. If you didn't get the underlying network infrastructure to understand what the network looks like, you may not necessarily notice those servers are in the wrong place, because you wouldn't have any way of identifying that. So that layer 1 through 4 visibility becomes very, very critical as part of the picture.
It's a lot of times it works kind of as a skeleton, because people will go and layer PRTG data on us. We have a functionality called Data View, where you can take the map and layer almost any other data on it. And so you can layer, PRTG, you can layer, NetFlow data from different sources. You could layer latency data from Thousand Eyes. And so now that you have more data on the map, and you can start to say, okay, well, I'm curious about this link. What's the latency here? What was it yesterday? Right. It's very useful for visual context.
Right. PRTG, boy, that application's been around for
it's interesting because
25 years, I think.
Yeah, and we find people use, there's a free component, obviously, but they also have, I think, a decent commercial business, mostly in Europe. But we see a lot of our big international customers using it, because I think their teams started using it because it was free, and it's kind of grown organically. And maybe I'll say this wrong, but a lot of I've been in that industry for a long time, and as a lot of the companies kind of run towards observability and try to package more data in, I think that there's an increased need for kind of basic functionality, kind of at a reasonable price for that kind of visibility.
Right. So the industry, your basic NetOps today and trying to automate, a lot of people start thinking of all the ML AI world, but that doesn't get you the basics of what you already know about your network. That's going to take a long time to get anywhere. So how would you recommend, how do you make sure, a lot of people are going to get, it's kind of sexy to say I'm doing AI ops. So people might jump to the wrong next step for automation.
Yeah. So, kind of, from our parochial thought process, it's a little bit before you go for AI ops and try to, solve everything magically. Why don't we just, automate what your smart network engineers are doing, right? Because they have, 30, 40 years of experience in their heads. As soon as they write those automations, they're codified in the system. When they retire, the knowledge doesn't leave. Other people can build on it. And a lot of the things that they know and that they could capture in a no-code environment, AI ops just isn't going to do that, right? And a lot of that AI feels And I know some of it's pretty clever, but it still feels like you're correlating a whole bunch of stuff and hoping that it gives you an answer, as opposed to, I know every time a ticket with web server comes in, I know my network engineer is going to do these 11 things in this order to try to get to root cause. And I know he's successful in figuring out root cause 98% of the time.
Right.
So if I did those 11 things every time automatically, I would be successful 98% of the time.
Right.
And if I'm only escalating 2% of the time, and I can pass to that person everything that I would have done if my smartest guy was working on the problem, right? I'm going to probably solve another 98% of that 2%.
Yeah, well, that's huge. And, like you stated, where the state of AI is today, it's more enclosed systems, like a Juniper, for instance, who knows their inputs and what those inputs actually mean.
Well,
Because just because I label it a QoS thing or something doesn't necessarily tell you what that actual functionality is, unless you really deeply understand what that button's doing.
well, a lot of it is like, it's kind of, I think that's a closed system, or it's a closed feedback loop.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
It's like if you have a robot working on the factory floor, they've got a bunch of sensors and things to make sure, painting robot is exactly this distance and it makes these moves, right? The challenge you have is someone had to do the work to say, like, how do you paint a car, right?
Right.
And that's where your senior engineer comes in to kind of do that. And I think I think there's a lot of value of being very deterministic about it, because I would say there's very few problems in networking that require the network engineer to be creative.
Correct.
To find root cause. Some creativity might help in kind of solving the problem when you don't have the right tools at hand. Right. But in terms of finding the root cause, there's not a lot of creativity there. And what there is a huge amount of applied experience, right? Where and then checking things. I've been on a lot of those calls, I'm sure you have too, where it's like, we'll try this. Do we have anyone there to try this? Can someone get on that router and check this? Right. And that's what we automate, right? That kind of process, and the people who build those automations, because every network is different. I mean, you can have same kind of gear, but especially once you go to even on the same network, and it's all Cisco stuff and Cisco trained people did it the Cisco way, every network is still different. Right. And so you start adding in, hybrid environments, and half the stuff's on cloud and some stuff's bursting, some stuff's not, right? And different companies have different policies about how they segment for security, how they, about everything, right? So you want to take their people and say, there's some basic things that we have an automation library that comes out of the box. So there's some basic stuff in there, simplistic things, but people still go down because of it. So, all your firewalls should be dual homed, and they should be running on the primary link, and both links should have similar capacity, right? And maybe a few other things in terms of ACLs and other stuff there, where, there should be no any-annies, so you have some basic stuff like that, where you can say, if there's a firewall and these things aren't true, someone should really take a look at it. Right.
So some practical best practices.
Right. But they're kind of generic and minimal. Then if the customer rolled out Palo Alto firewalls, we'll just make one up, and all of them are in front of F5s. Well, you're going to have a bunch of stuff there that's like special for you. Right. Because of the applications you're running, how you want to run them, how you're doing QoS, how you segment it, how you're running DMZ. So you can take all of that and put it into NetBrain. So your smart guys are basically saying this should be true in this, and we should check this. And if this is here, then we should do this. And you build those intents up over time. But now you're watching. It's like having your smart guy logging into all your devices whenever there's a change and going through it to see if they see anything weird, right? Or that doesn't meet the policy. And that tends to be very, the output of that tends to be very powerful. And it's somewhat amazing, even the generic ones, when we put that in a customer environment, how much stuff pops up the first day when you turn that on.
Sure.
And, and it all falls into that category of stuff they didn't know.
Yeah, it's doing you have to do the foundational components well. And if you get away from doing those well through a config chain, topology shifting and things, then that's when your house might fall into the
if you don't have a good foundation, eventually the pretty facade will crack.
Exactly. And it's real easy to get to that tomorrow. So a lot of those things, like those configuration checks, aren't that exciting, but they are very necessary. It's like taking your blood pressure every day. It's like taking the blood pressure.
It's against a standard in a policy, right? The intents, which is much more effective than doing it against the last config, because the last config will give you all kinds of false positives.
Right.
Because there's good reasons to change configs. Companies change them all the time.
Sure. Exactly.
Right. And if they do it well, that's fine. It's when they do it in a way that deviates from what you would want it to be that you have a problem.
Especially with overlaying the intent of the network on top of the intent of the application. They all have intents, and it's very easy for them to get out of sync.
Well, one of like QoS is a big thing, right? And being able to look at all the paths that have QoS and verify that QoS is being set consistently end to end is almost impossible for a human to do at any sort of useful scale.
Right.
But if you're checking that automatically all the time, you're going to fix a lot of problems that will cause application performance issues due to misconfiguration on the network, and will be very hard to find. The
old Zoom meeting or Teams meeting with the
exactly. It's I find that when we get into the customers that kind of embrace this, we have one that's a big pharmaceutical, and they went from having 50-something subcontractors from one of the big Indian outsource firms taking their first calls and doing kind of the minimum SLA required of 15 or 20 minutes of talking and saying yes, it's providing some empathy and escalating, and then that results in some some satisfaction issues for the escalation engineers who aren't there to take first calls, but they're getting a lot of first calls with no appreciable work done on them to troubleshoot. And so they ended up being able to eliminate almost that entire first call team. They realized they didn't need to increase the size of their escalation team anymore. So they're able to save some money there. And then they hired 3 people with one of our partners to just write the automations, because they wanted their escalation guys focused on doing their job, which is keeping everything running. But they wanted to constantly be adding more capability to their NetBrain. And so they had a separate team doing that. And their partner said, hey, we can help you with that. And so they've embedded themselves into the customer's operation that way. But the customer's, very happy with that, because all of that work is continually paying, they're investing in getting long-term benefit as opposed to paying money to first call people that were just passing the buck essentially most of the time.
Creating irritation. It is powered on, right?
Yes. Did you try powering it on or off? I'll wait while you do it again.
Right, exactly.
Because I don't trust you. I want you to do it after I told you to do it.
Right, when I'm watching it go, I don't know.
Because I've got like another 18 minutes I got to talk with you.
And could you look into this? No, we'll just take the notes and hand it on to the next level.
Yeah, exactly. So it's it feels like a bit of and our biggest challenge is people don't know this is possible,
Right.
right? Like I said, the marketing of it's hard because automation, intent, and probably a half dozen other words in
Right.
English. There just aren't enough words in English to describe all the different things well. Right. It's like saying snow when we speak English. Eskimos, I think, have something like, 47 different words for different kinds of snow and ice, right? Because, that's their life and there's differences. And, there's just not enough words to explain it. And so our challenge is getting people to understand that there's this solution for a massive problem that they're often not thinking of as the problem. Like if you talk to the CIO, say, we're going to automate everything. And it's like, what are you doing about automating network ops? Well, we're using Ansible, right? Well, that's really a software development project. Your engineers aren't able to do it themselves. Or, we're using live action or intentional. There's lots of tools that, and most of those are more focused on provisioning and rolling out configs.
Right.
They're much less about let's automate the day-to-day work that a network engineer does.
Yep. They're more about the refreshes and the upgrades and that type of
which is good.
Day two versus the day two, I guess, is the part that a lot of people ignore. The day two opportunity.
Yeah, they like day zero, day one, because that sells hardware.
Right, exactly.
assuming you can ship it.
Right, exactly. Yes. Yep. So that's a big differentiator. We've also, and this might make sense for this talk or not, but it's hard to, where do you go find network infrastructure people to talk to? Like security people, there's SANS, there's RSA, there's all these events, Black Hat, and they used to be interop in the day. This is 15, 20 years ago when it was more of an end user thing back in the evolution of networking days. How do you find those people to get the message?
So we do Cisco Live a lot, but I think the challenge for me is not finding network people. I really want to go find the person who sits on the CIO staff that's responsible for network operations.
Okay.
Whoever that rolls up to is the person who's going to understand the outcomes, and they're going to turn to their trusted architect, CTO architect kind of person, and say, I want you to look into this, because if it's true that they can mitigate config drift, eliminate outages and breaches due to that, automate our ticket resolution, and find me a way to get the cost savings that I've already been signed up for against my will.
Yes.
Right. And improve CSAT score with our customers internally or externally or both. There's too many wins there at a executive kind of level for them not to take a look at it. Even if they're like kind of approaching it with, it's too good to be true, and I don't really believe you can do this. We're pretty confident we can prove it almost like a scientific proof, showing the before and after. The challenge when we start with a low-level network guy and we work our way up is they generally don't see the big picture. They just want the pretty maps, and their boss is not going to spend a lot of money for pretty maps for the network engineer.
You want to spend how much?
Exactly. To make your life better.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the old days. Oh, I don't know, this is over a decade ago. Privileged account management was a new thing about 12 years ago. And everybody'd have to come in on the weekends just to change passwords, because everything has a password, an admin password, whether it's a database, operating system, application. And people used to do that across the whole company, but no one really realized the impact when you're bringing all these different groups on a weekend to change these passwords manually.
Yeah.
That's kind of the same type of a thing. It's just hard to bubble up because people don't, they always think the network just has to work, right?
Right. And a lot of the outcomes are only interesting to the senior guy. So to some degree, that's the best way for us to start the conversation.
Sure.
and have them, and everybody says they want to do that.
Right.
But the problem is the outcomes of the next generation of Cisco router are not really interesting
No.
to someone on the CIO staff, right? It's
Right.
like, I mean, they're smart guys and they know that it's faster and better, right? But they've all been faster and better for their whole career,
Yep.
right? And that doesn't matter that much to their running their business.
Right.
Whereas the stuff we're talking to them has a very direct connection to running their business better, which
Right.
is their job.
Yeah.
And like I said, because it's deterministic, it's very provable.
Yep.
And it's really compelling, but that means you have to prove it too.
Exactly. And get it on the priority thing of things they can actually take on this year. You got to get on that list of projects to look at.
Right. And generally speaking, because they didn't know it was possible, they forgot to budget for it,
Right.
which means you need to be talking to someone who can say, yeah, Cisco's not going to ship us that stuff anyway. So instead of buying it now, we're going to put off that refresh for 6 months or a year, and we're
Right.
going to do this other thing.
And Cisco says they're going to do it for you anyway. It's going to be built into their systems.
Right. Well, yeah. So that's the best one, because all of our partners, senior network engineers already know that what Cisco's marketing says is not what their stuff does.
Exactly.
And the interesting too is that Cisco's one of our biggest customers. Their business continuity services run on NetBrain.
Okay, really? That's interesting. That's great to hear. We're a big company that kind of grew up in the world, not because we have any particular reason other than we were a security VAR and early on, and that we kind of did anything the best of breed. So we didn't end up doing a lot of Cisco because we'd end up back in the old days with Checkpoint and then Palo Alto, and then we got involved in Juniper. So yeah, we kind of got in that best of breed world where you have to mix all these things together, which
Yeah,
is the thing that the world wants to be anyway, because you don't see one system that does everything well generally. That's why there are best of breed.
yeah, and also once a customer, once they crack the door open, it's easy to start saying, oh, well,
Right.
it's not like we're Cisco everywhere. So they get one of these, one of those. And I think when you bring public cloud into it, it just, and everybody's doing it. So, and some people are still moving to the cloud. Some people are moving back from it. But almost everyone is straddling it in some way, which means they have stuff in the cloud and stuff that's not, and it all needs to work together. So, yeah.
What's an interesting point you mentioned earlier too, is if you're planning the future and you're a CTO type person, generally these full stack engineers, what they're going to be weakest at is the layers 1, 2, 3, and 4. They'll be pretty good at the application, end user parts, but generally they haven't played in big distributed networks enough to really have great experience at tying root cause problems back to that transport layer.
Yeah, and that's what our application assurance does. It kind of tells you, for this application, here's like the parts of the network and the components of the network that need to be up and running well. And then we'll watch those with the idea that we can tell you if there's a problem there that's impacting that application's ability to run at the network level, which I'm not sure that we chose the right name there, but
it's called
app assurance.
Okay.
And so the challenge is everybody says, oh, so like you do what New Relic does, or what app, what is it called, APM, or there's a bunch of products that are very focused on the higher layers, and we're not. We're everything is looked through this lens of we're focused on the network, but we can watch, so if it impacts the application, we can do change management, we can do the preventative automation, that it's all built on top of this deep understanding of the network, as built and as built over time. So
Yeah, I just one question, Alex. Can you tell us a little bit about who your primary competitors are?
Sure, we find that again, it kind of comes down to that bit of the word automation. So Ansible comes up a lot, and you know they're really a development tool. We hear Forward Networks a lot. They're funded by Goldman Sachs, and they do the mapping really well. They don't do a lot of the automating. iTential is kind of the opposite of that. They do some, especially day 0, day 1 automation, but they don't do the mapping, right? And without the visual foundation, it's very hard to do that, you know, automating, and it's hard to understand things, right? You know, it's kind of the difference between someone giving you a directions with a bullet list and someone showing you the map, right? You know, and having both is optimal.
And Kirk, you talked about, you know, best of breed and how NetBrain fit into that. Can you talk about maybe a use case with one of your customers, how you guys have worked together in the past?
We have with the NetBrain, we just actually have a very large enterprise that we just actually got done having phase 2 go in after 6 months after the initial purchase of NetBrain. A lot of that is around positioning themselves around it's a retail organization, so making sure that their point of sale is working, that type of thing, and making sure they have the information they need to get to the root cause while keeping the staff relatively lean. I don't know, do you have any particular impact on that one to discuss there? I don't have any more specific details on that, Alex, but
yeah, so the only thing I'd say about that customer is but I think 2 things are pretty telling. One is the second time they've purchased a lot.
right, yep.
Right.
Yep.
And they're also, when we see retailers, some retailers are more tech savvy than others. And this is a very technically savvy networking group. You know, what they sell has a element of network connectivity in it. So their teams are very knowledgeable. And their challenge was basically they needed to just improve their efficiency dramatically in order to meet their internal goals, right? And and after using it for a while, they kind of went all in to do that.
Correct. Yeah, they're very advanced. They're looking at, you know, how do you keep people scheduled, make sure they're going to show up for appointments, and making sure they've got the funnel, and so they need a lot of information to be able to do that. Make sure that they can get that information, so they place a high expectation on with the customer experience, and if they can't deliver on that, that won't go well.
And in their business, that's a big competitive advantage.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Because generally speaking, in that industry, customer experience is not the best. So having a good one separates you from the pack.
Cool.
You can kind of see where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. It's kind of, you know, if you want customer service, you want it to be like Lexus.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Alex, I appreciate you being on IT Trendsetters today. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.